Okay, our speaker tonight is Wes Gould, and he works with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, Shoreline Conservation Service. He provides waterfront property owners with technical and financial assistance for shoreline erosion control projects. He manages the Shoreline Erosion Control Revolving Loan Fund and provides loans to install nature-based living shoreline practices. He's a graduate of Salisbury University and resides in Calvert County with his wife and two young children. I think you said they were ages 2 and 3. His talk is Implementing Climate Resilient Living Shorelines in Maryland. And he's going to talk about the history of shoreline erosion control practices and how traditional techniques have evolved in recent years. He's going to talk about what are living shorelines and how they can be used to enhance habitat and water quality and help prepare for climate impacts. That's a big deal. He'll also discuss the Shoreline Conservation Service and the technical and financial assistance opportunities available through the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. So welcome and thank you so much for speaking to us tonight. Wes, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Jill. And I appreciate you all having me tonight. I was telling you a little bit before, Jill, at least you know, but I signed in just before this to research a little bit of the webinars that have been done before so I could get an idea of the material covered, and really impressive and honored to be invited to guest speak at this group. So thank you for having me. Lot to cover. I'll do my best to I just wanted to give you kind of a high level overview. The gist of the presentation is implementing climate resilient shorelines in Maryland, and we'll give you kind of a broad overview here. We'll start with just a general shoreline overview in the state. So there's about 7,000 miles, give or take, of tidal shoreline in the state of Maryland. About 85% of that is privately owned, so that's worth noting. You know, doing work on private property is extremely important if we want to restore this estuary. And about 50% of that bay tributary shoreline is already hardened, and it's debatable whether that number is out of date because there's revetments going in, bulkheads daily. So we've been using that number for quite a while. A lot of the erosion, it's mostly just wave and wind energy. Those are the main drivers of this erosion, but things like boating, some human activities, stormwater runoff, those are all contributing factors that kind of accelerate that pace. And it's a statewide issue. All 16 counties are included in that, including Baltimore City. So erosion will be the topic of discussion tonight. So it's not a bad thing. You know, it's a natural process. To me, that photo in the top right, it's a beautiful thing. You know, it's a natural shoreline. But you know, trees, like I said, the rate is quickly accelerating. But you know, the sand, you'll have an erosive area in one side of the beach, and on the other side of the shoreline reach, you'll have an accretive area. So it's a very dynamic coastal system that's happening. This erosion, it feeds our beaches that we all know and love, our marshes, offshore habitats like sandbars, SAV beds, which trap some of that sediment. So it's integral to the health of the bay. Accelerating factors, as I mentioned, boat wake, stormwater runoff. I can't tell you how many properties that we go out to and give site assessments and meet with the property owners, and it turns out the erosion is actually coming from the upland versus the tidal situation. Coastal squeeze, just building close to the that tidal edge and having limited room to work. And of course, sea level rise and climate impacts are a part of that as well. So every year, every 5 years, the state gets together, the different agencies develop a sea level rise prediction report. And the latest, which was updated in 2023, as you can see, is 1.7 feet by 2050. So that's what we're looking at as of now. And I wanted to include a few different tools that you can use in your spare time if you see flooding. The My Coast app is really great. If you scan the QR code or download that on the App Store, that's a great resource to document exactly, pinpoint the flooding. It's all connected to the NOAA tide gauges and gets in the hand of some decision makers, some policy makers, and ultimately it supports a lot of the climate work that our department does. And I'm just brushing the surface on kind of a couple of programs, but really across our unit and the department as a whole, there's a lot of great work going on. So the other one that I use on almost a daily basis is this Maryland Coastal Atlas, very interactive tool. You can pull that up and find your neighborhood, and look at, shoreline changes, storm surge events that are based on the category of hurricane that would hit. You could look up all sorts of different things, SAV beds, regulatory maps. So it's a really great one-stop shop to kind of dive into some of this. All right. So we've got erosion. We've got a number of different factors. So we've got sea level rise, and of course, that's causing our marshes to migrate inland. So as that sea level rises, you've got tidal marsh loss and marshes migrating inland. So a lot of our projects we're looking up the slope and trying to stabilize kind of a full transition area. And that goes into the forest, as I'm sure you all have seen over on the lower eastern shore, Dorchester County, those ghost forests from saltwater intrusion. That's not an uncommon sight. And the top right picture I just thought was a good example of, just simply put, kind of what that looks like and how a bulkhead would impact that. You've got a little bit of freeboard and you're buying yourself some time, but a big storm event comes, it gets on the back end of that, and you know what happens from there. So the Shoreline Conservation Service is the program that I help to manage. It's an old program. We were established back in the 60s. And the goal of the program really is to provide technical and financial support to waterfront owners throughout Maryland that are experiencing erosion, which is quite a few, more often than not, that's the case unless there is a revetment or a bulkhead, but we provide support to those folks as well. So we do technical assistance through site analysis. We'll go out to the site, evaluate the property, kind of recommend some solutions, develop a plan of attack, connect folks with their local network of people, and then financial assistance is done through that interest-free loan program. And since this program used to fund pictures like the top right, those structural practices, since the 2008 passage of the Living Shoreline Act, which basically deems, a property owner is basically to look to do a nature-based solution first before anything structural, unless it can be proven that it's not practicable to install some sort of marsh creation living shoreline project. So that's kind of when we made the switch, and ever since then we've been funding strictly living shoreline projects. This is another tool. This is kind of, if you want to have us out to the site, get some recommendations for what it's worth, we were happy to do so. These are just a few. This is a little sample of some of the submissions that we've received. It's a quick 30-second Google survey, who you are, where you're located, a short description, and again, you can upload some photos. So as you can see, it's a bit all over the map. We get extreme urgent erosion issues, as bulkhead failure, the backyard, we lost a quarter of the backyard, to, maybe there's some stormwater that's resting up against the bulkhead and causing some sinkholes and a little bit of deterioration. And one fellow uploaded a photo of himself, so I found it was fair game to throw him on this slide. So this is kind of just a snapshot of what it looks like. We'll come out to the site. In this case, colleagues recommended a biolog, really low energy site. This was over in Kent County, I believe. But these are just some of the questions that property owners ask. This isn't something like purchasing a car every few years, or this is a major transaction for folks, and not everyone's familiar with the process. It's like the home building. How often do you do it? So we really guide folks through the process, get them connected to if there's county officials that need to be involved, or critical area department. We'll connect them with those folks, or the MDE regulators, Army Corps, and we'll just kind of try to guide them through that path. Whether that's getting local contractors that service the area that specialize in this work. It's really all dependent on project goals. So that's the most important thing. And desktop analysis. So this is something we do typically a little bit before and a little after the site visit. We'll just get an idea of kind of the shoreline orientation. Again, project goals is where we start, because if property owners not interested in doing the ecological uplift and that sort of thing, it's just, hey, I want to stop the erosion. Like, that's great. I don't have grandkids that I want to play on the shoreline out in front of my house. I don't need to access it. I can fish just as well off of these rocks as I can in a marsh. So, all the goals are different. So we try to be fully transparent and recommend appropriate solutions. Of course, promoting living shorelines as often as we can. But these are some things that we kind of look at. Shading, if it's a north-facing slope, a lot of those grasses love sunlight. They need 6 hours plus, as I'm sure many of you are more in the plant realm than I am. Water depth, cost obviously can be quite a bit more expensive, more material to do living shoreline projects. Salinities, will the vegetation recommended support those salinities? Fetch, that sort of thing. And this is just a picture of Coastal Atlas there. You can see the shoreline changes. This example was in West River, Maryland, in Anne Arundel County. And you can see an old dilapidated bulkhead. I think someone's grandfather had installed that years ago using some plywood boards, and it is no longer intact. So they were looking for a living shoreline solution. So this is kind of the concept plan we came up with, just biolog with some little bit of stone all beneath mean low water. So it really just, the only thing visible is really that vegetated slope. And those biologs tend to stay in place for quite a long time. We've got some projects that have held strong for, that biolog's been there for 15, 20 years, if they're submerged. So these are kind of our guiding principles here, is to understand their project goals, develop partnerships, identify different funding opportunities, share resources, and provide a clear path forward. And again, we've touched on this, but this is the Shoreline Erosion Control interest-free loan. We can fund design or construction. And pretty much anyone is open to apply. Private citizens is something that we piloted this past year, and had good success with. There's certainly a high demand. So we plan to continue to move forward with that. Communities, local governments, nonprofits, all welcome to apply. And the term on the loan ranges from 5 to 20 years, and it's dependent on project type. So if you've got a biolog job, we wouldn't want to be making 20-year payments on that. Sills are typically about 15 years, but we'll dive into the different techniques in a minute. There is a small administrative fee that goes to the revolving loan fund for our administration. And that's for going to the Board of Public Works and facilitating the whole process, kind of being the liaison between property owner, the contractor, and so on. So all this talk about living shorelines, what is a living shoreline? This is our department's definition. And I'll just go ahead and read it. So living shorelines are a suite of techniques used to reduce erosion and enhance habitat by restoring and or enhancing natural features while maintaining coastal process. So we like living shoreline gets tossed around a lot. It's a hot buzzword, and I like to think about it as kind of like tools in your toolbox. That could be a traditional sill, groins, plantings, breakwaters, oyster castles, a mixture of these different things. Typically, it's some sort of mixture of sand, stone, and plants. And this is a project at Assateague State Park, which I think we've got another slide later on, but you can see kind of the pre-restoration conditions and post. So this is just a great visual of kind of the, bulkhead retaining wall versus the living shoreline, the structural versus a greener solution. And basically it comes down to a bulkhead, you know, the strongest day that it's going to have is the day that those contractors demobilize and leave the site. It becomes weaker over time. The living shoreline, um, the great John Flood, for those of you who know him, he's a marine contractor. He used to drive piles and has since switched over and does nothing but living shorelines. He said it's kind of like a baby, that at first you bring them home from the hospital and they can't hold their head up and they become stronger over time. My kids 3 and 4 up there banging their head against the wall, and they're they're tough little kids. So I just always like that analogy that they become stronger over time. You've got to take care of them, of course, but kind of like tending a garden. So these are your traditional methods. I think we've hit that home. You all have seen, I'm sure, along the shorelines, the people have put foundations in the water historically, tires, large O-ring culverts. It's all out there. So we've seen some creative things. If it's hard and heavy, it's probably has been used for erosion control in the past, whether permitted or not. So some issues with the structural approach. We already kind of talked about that, but the bulkhead, you get a lot of that upland sheet flow, stormwater runoff that rests up against the back of it, creates sinkholes, creates a weak spot. And then on the other side, you get the tidal action, which kind of toe scour, we call it. So it'll come up, hit that wall and scour the base. And over time, it just tips over. And this example here, the big picture is Cape St. Clair in Anne Arundel County after those October storms. I believe it was 23. So you can see what happened to the bulkhead there. And there was actually a pretty large scale breakwater project done just to the right of that. And these are, we've all seen sometimes folks go overboard, and this is just a quick example I wanted to throw up there. That top left is kind of iconic. So you can see, what the shoreline was like previous to that and the amount of stone that was put on that shoreline. So that's all low marsh out in front of there, which gives you the idea that it's not a very high energy site if it can support alterniflora. There's forested banks. So we don't want to see that. And this is kind of where the living shoreline started, the technique. If you throw the word out, if you say the name living shoreline, a lot of folks, this is what comes to mind, some form of a sill project. And all a sill is, you go out typically about 35 feet channelward, build essentially a rock revetment with some small gaps. Traditionally, it's 100 feet of stone, 10-foot gap, another 100 feet of stone. So it allows for some flushing and some hydrology to get in there to support that Spartina growth. They started with pipes, moved to smaller staggered sills. So it's not one of our preferred techniques, but it's certainly it can be effective, and it certainly supports that marsh growth. It gives it some stability. So then we move on, those gaps expand a bit with these headland breakwaters. So you'll kind of pick up on a theme here. Expanding these gaps is what we're looking to do and open up the shorelines for habitat purposes, access, what have you. So this is a technique some Australian researchers developed, and a man out of the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, Scott Hardaway, some of you may know. He was kind of an early adopter in our region in the Chesapeake Bay. So he kind of brought these techniques into the Bay watershed, developed an engineering ratio associated with these structures and gaps. And basically it's 1.65 wide to 1 deep. So 1.65 channelward between two rock structures to 1 deep to the crescent beach. So it's just a general rule of thumb, but it's practiced industry wide. And you can see these are some projects. One's on the Potomac and one's out on Rhodes Point there. So some high energy sites. So this kind of brought these living shorelines out into the big leagues and the large fetch, several miles, but also quite costly, as you can imagine, to bring in some of the material. And the evolution of that a little bit is these vegetated headland breakwaters. So how do we use that same technique but have it fully vegetated? And this, full disclosure, this is Annapolis Maritime Museum um, down there in Eastport, and this is it's a lower energy site. It's a bit more protected, but we did have some constraints. We had a building on the one side that was obliterated with Hurricane Isabel. It got hit really hard. So there was some structural damage there. And then we also have a very active marina on the other side, which deep water slips. There's some larger boats in there. So this is kind of what we came up with. And you can see the bones of it there on that bottom left picture. All that we used was sand throughout. And then that picture is right on the end there for that headland structure. We just mixed at the base. There was some concrete rubble and things that were already on the shoreline. We used as a base material, added some bluestone, some cheaper stone, and then mixture of cobble, gravel, pea gravel, sand, enough to get a mix to where you could actually put some plugs in there. And you can see how that's taken off. And then from these structures to essentially no structures, this shingle beach is a technique that Albert McCullough with Sustainable Science kind of brought into our region. This is a Dutch technique, and he was the first to kind of bring it in here. This is the first project in the state done like this. It's in Queen Anne's County at Conquest Beach. It's a county park. You're welcome to go and visit. It's an interesting site. So we've since done a couple others and we're kind of experimenting with that, but you can kind of see the evolution from where we started to where we're at now, and you'll pick up on where we're going as well. So maintaining a natural aesthetic, that's something, this field is a little bit of engineering, it's a little bit of art, it's a little bit of landscaping. So it's an interdisciplinary field. And our end goal here is we want to be able to look at these, like this project here. We want to be able to, it's hard to find this project on the Google Maps. Every time I Google it, it blends in so well with the landscape. And if you walk out there, it looks just as great. It'd be really difficult, unless you really know what you're looking for, to tell that something was done. So this is a great example over there at the Chesapeake Bay Environmental Center in Queen Anne's County. And I'd love to host a tour sometime. I saw that you all do field trips, and it'd be great to check out a few of these sites. So as the plant group, I did a little research, and don't quote me on the Latin names here. I did my best, but I'm a common name guy. But this just gives you a little bit of idea of the different plants that are typically used in these living shoreline projects. If you're working in a higher salinity area, it's typically the two, alterniflora and Spartina alterniflora and Spartina patens that are used. and then maybe some switchgrass or some beach grass above that. The lower salinity environments, it's a little bit tougher. They don't have that dense root mass that kind of lasts all year round, so they come and go with the seasons. But three square is a great option. Hibiscus, you can get some of those flowering plants, cardinal flower, pickerel weed we've seen used. Um, but yeah, a lot of times we do often recommend American switchgrass, even on the upland. It's just such a versatile plant. All right, I think we've covered this one enough. You know all about the loan program, and this is the grant program, outcome 3. So on the Grants Gateway, we've compiled all of our different funding sources to make it easier on the end user, which is you. And basically, our hope with the loan program is to get folks to sign up for the loan program to leverage that money and make those grant dollars that we have go further, and show commitment from a community, a property owner, a county, what have you. So this is outcome 3, and Nicole Carlozo is the contact for that, and I can get you that information. But this is the hot topic. This is what everyone's interested in, and it's called the Community Resilience Grant. So as the name implies, communities, um, counties. This tends to go a lot to the more shared spaces, I'll say, are prioritized. Not to say it's not impossible to get a project funded on private property if all the right components are in place, but just wanted to touch on that there. And here's a few of the projects. As you can see, uh, several projects have already been constructed, several in the construction phase right now, and a few are in permitting. Spread pretty well across the state. And I'll give you a few examples of those. So resilient design techniques, how can we plan for these climate impacts and sea level rise? It's a tricky subject, but I think the first step is just evaluating that site holistically, looking at rainfall events, where is that water going? How does it trickle down to the shoreline? How do we capture that as high up in the landscape as possible, slow it down, spread it out, and soak it in? Maximize vegetation, maximize the plantings. It's certainly a um, balanced approach, kind of looking at these shorelines by a reach scale. So many times we're confined, say you're an owner, you've got a 100-foot parcel, that's your responsibility. But to really look at these things holistically, we have got to start working with our neighbors and having these conversations. That's a big hurdle that we run into. So if the adjacent property owner is not on board, it can really give you some tough times in the permitting stages. Um, and then just incorporating sea level rise data into the design. How easy is it to add material and bring those elevations up in the future? What's that marsh migration corridor look like in the upland? And is there maintenance? Is there a management plan in place? Is someone checking on these projects? And construction considerations, the different permitting requirements. There's time of year restrictions for waterfowl, anadromous fish, submerged aquatic vegetation, sturgeon, you name it. So there's certainly safeguards in place, for around those other natural resources. So it's always a delicate balance when working in this critical zone. So geese is always a pleasant surprise at the end of the project. It turns out they love Spartina grasses. So we've got to be flexible on our approach and work with the tides. This project here, this is Assateague, right next to the Verrazano Bridge and the boat ramp facility there. Highly encourage you to go check this one out. You can pull up right there is the bathhouse and walk out to the shoreline. You can see the pre-restoration picture there on the left-hand side. And as you can see, this site beforehand was just a mowed lawn. was getting some saltwater intrusion. The lawn wasn't, um, the lawn grass wasn't even able to survive, and just an eroded marsh edge. So we added that stable slope, stable 8 to 10 to 1, 8 to 1, 10 to 1 slope, um, mixed aggregate headland structures, same materials, planted it up with those Spartina grasses, and this project has done really well. It's actually recruited oysters. Um, we've captured some of the runoff from the parking lot in the area that was kind of bare ground there is now a thriving wetland ecosystem. So we just kind of embraced that area and got the park manager behind it. This is the most highly visited park in the state. So really great outreach opportunity there. This project here is West River United Methodist Center, and we actually hosted a training here, Living Shoreline training, just last year. We're getting ready to host another one with the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professional course, kind of an introductory course. And so yeah, this is a great example as well. This was right after construction, so it hadn't had a chance to vegetate yet, but if you go out there now, it's flush with vegetation. It looks fantastic. This is one, again, all those wetland pockets between the buildings there. This was a bulkhead that was dilapidated, upland mowed long grass with a pipe that went directly from those parking lots directly into the bay, untreated. So we daylighted those pipes, put in what we call a regenerative stormwater conveyance, kind of a step pool wetland stormwater treatment system. Added some woody debris, planted it up, and the project's doing great. And this is also a good example because it's got on the right side, which you can't see, we've got a segmented sill, which is kind of the more traditional approach. Then you've got headland breakwaters there, vegetated headland breakwaters in the middle near the pier, and you've got a shingle beach to the left. So you can see all three practices in one spot. And you've got stormwater management incorporated into it, which is really the goal of what we're trying to do here. So it's a great spot, great educational opportunity. This project's Water Street up in Havre de Grace in Harford County. Large scale restoration project, highly urbanized area, small, and the pipes were extremely small and undersized. Flooding's a big issue in this community. And you can see kind of the access has been improved. This was all industrial concrete bulkhead or wooden bulkhead, as you see in that picture, completely inaccessible for humans or critters. So now it's, thriving little public park. Um, and there's water quality credits and things without getting into the weeds that the county was able to capture. And all in all, it's been a great success. This was Deal Island down in Somerset County. Scott Hardaway design, Unity Landscape build, high energy site. You can see on the picture from 1991, the historic sand dunes in that picture, well over that person's head. And you can see where we discovered the project in 2014 and what that looks like. And it is no longer there. So as part of this project that was built back up, this is to really protect this freshwater impoundment. That's great waterfowl habitat behind the project, as well as a county roadway. As you can see in the 2021 picture, that's kind of the end of the road. But this project's in, it looks great. And I think we have some examples of the planting being established. So you can see it takes a couple years, but not long. 2019 is pre-restoration conditions. 2022 just planted of June. September of that same year, getting a little bit of growth. And then by August of 23, it's full-fledged, fully vegetated. And the benefit to outcome 3, the Resiliency Through Restoration grant, that Nicole runs, there's an adaptive management piece, which is a really innovative, forward-thinking component to add to this grant program. So we're able to push the science forward. We've been trying to expand the gaps, lower the structure, the elevations, make them more aesthetically pleasing, and just thinking a little bit outside the box and continuing to evolve the science. And of course, we're monitoring those sites, many of those sites, and there's a pot of money specifically designated to tweaking those projects as necessary. So that's something that's really, really interesting. And that's all I have. So I'll hand it over to you, Jill. Happy to take any questions, and thanks again for having me on.
Okay, thank you very much. That was really, really interesting. Okay, Robin?
Oh, sure. Thank you. That was a really interesting presentation. And my question is about migration corridors. I'm in North Beach and there's riprap under the boardwalk, and every year hundreds and hundreds of horseshoe crabs come to the area to mate. And there's a group of people who bless their hearts, they go out there every day and try to dig them out, but still hundreds die. So what can I say to North Beach to convince them, their boardwalk keeps getting torn up in storms and they keep repairing it. So what can be done in a situation like that in a migration corridor that is also popular and used by so many walkers? And how do you integrate this into a heavily used area? I guess that's really the question, with a potentially
Yeah.
resistant municipality.
Right, right. I'm familiar with the area. I'm not too far away, Robin. Yeah, I think the horseshoe crab issue is something that we're running into even at some of our resiliency projects, some of those higher energy sites. The horseshoe crabs, whether it's a stone breakwater that's 80 feet channelward or right on shore, they tend to just get trapped. So we're trying to figure out a way, a maintenance schedule to go out there and get them out. But as far as, a resiliency plan, North Beach actually has some great examples of what can be done. They're maintaining that the beach area, some larger scale breakwaters out there, but something like that, you saw kind of some of the slides. I think Swan Point, some of these come to mind. You could certainly move some of those revetments offshore, um, or attached via sand spits and create those kind of stable crescent beaches to give horseshoe crabs and critters and people an area to play. But of course, that's a costly endeavor. May take some years of planning and some federal funding trickling down. But it's certainly worth starting the conversation again. It's a journey that's what we try to paint the picture up front, is getting these shorelines in the ground from site planning to construction, getting through the permit process and aligning funding and getting materials delivered. It's quite the journey. But no, that's a great question. Thank you.
Okay, Ann Watson?
I live on a cove that's off the Patuxent River down in Calvert County. And we put in a living shoreline in 2017. And it has a sill with vents in it because there was more energy than they would have liked to just not have all of that. That's why we have it, is because of the energy that comes off the Patuxent. Anyway, this spring we had gobs of algae come over the sill and land on the Spartina alterniflora and killed some of it. And I'm just wondering if it's better to let it try to grow back on its own, which it's doing very slowly, or to get Spartina alterniflora plugs to fill in.
I'm sorry, you said gobs of what?
Algae.
Algae. Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, that can certainly smother the grasses along with even just debris, woody debris. If somebody cut their Phragmites down and we call it the rack line. We like a little bit of rack or woody debris in there. That's where a lot of the young of the year and juvenile snakes and turtles and things hide. But yeah, as far as plant growth, that's one of the things we've got to keep it clear of debris.
Yeah, we pulled the algae off. My husband pulled the algae off, and there's a few sprouts coming up. But do you think it's a better idea to buy plugs and replant it? Because we do have Phragmites in the area on a different part of our beach, and I'm a little concerned. I don't want to leave gaps for the Phragmites to maybe seed.
Yeah, I'd get some plugs in there. And you can plant them anytime, even in the fall when they're dormant, and they'll just come back even stronger in the spring. Best window's kind of that April, May, June time frame, to get the most growth. But yeah, I don't think throwing a few more plugs would hurt anything.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there was a question in the chat from Steve Lonker on the topic of Phragmites and removing them. How do you balance the removal of Phragmites resulting in shoreline erosion with preserving or establishing native wetlands?
That's a great question. Yeah, Phragmites is tough, and there's been some research done lately saying maybe it has more of a benefit than we realize, certainly when it comes to the resiliency aspect and those robust root systems. But as you know, they don't go down as far into the ground, so they kind of chunks away over time, without a better term for you. But yeah, frag, you can burn it, you can flood it, you can excavate it. Those are kind of few options, but it's a tough balance to get that native marsh back. That's something we're looking to figure out. I know there was some work done in Calvert County actually where they used large plastic tarps and solarized a part of the marsh there at Calvert Cliffs and tried to fry the root system. So that's definitely something that we're looking into. Now, spraying seems to be fairly effective, but we all know that's not the best. We'd prefer an alternative option. But no, that's a great question, and I'll have to get back to you on that as we learn more.
Okay, thank you. Jeremy?
Great. Hi. First, I'd like to say great presentation with a lot of really useful information. You hinted at some of the things that homeowners could do, particularly upland, like capturing rain so it doesn't go down to the shoreline, or plantings upland. Are there other things that homeowners can do along the shoreline? And kind of related to that, if a homeowner wants to plant some of the species that you highlighted, are they able to do that along the shoreline, or does it have to be from a licensed contractor or done by a licensed contractor?
Yeah, that's a good question. To my knowledge, you can plant native plants along the shoreline without a license. I think any work in tidewater, and you could check with MDE to get the official answer on that. Needs to be done by a licensed marine contractor. But as far as plantings, if they're native, I don't think there's any issues there. But as far as things that can be done, it's so site specific, like what exactly is appropriate to be done at the site. So it's hard to give kind of a blanket answer there. But we'd be happy to come out and kind of give you an assessment and give you some ideas if that'd be helpful.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Frank, if you want to go ahead and unmute.
Thanks. And I had also a Phragmite question. My neighbors had the Phragmites sprayed, and everything above the ground has died. The roots are still there, of course, but what people don't realize is that the roots hold a lot of sand in, and the shoreline that we have, the shore has started to deteriorate as the Phragmites have gone away. So I guess the answer is we need to get something else planted in there to stop that current deterioration.
Yeah, it's a really tricky subject because you get those roots that, like you said, are holding all that sediment back. Plus, you've got these new shoots that are coming up every year. So, like, spraying a site once isn't going to do it. It's a multi-year process, and in those multi-year, you also want those native grasses to come up. So it's again, it's a fine balance between, and I don't have the answers, but between, spot spraying and using sponge techniques for those shoots and it's a tough question. It's a tough, there's a lot of different factors there.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Lori?
Hi, I was wondering if you could talk about any use within Maryland of living shorelines projects for communities under the community rating system for flood prevention, working with FEMA.
I am not super familiar with that process with FEMA. I know Nicole, who I work closely with, would be a great contact for you. She works with MEMA a lot and MDEM. So I think, she'd be a great person to talk with. I know FEMA works directly with the counties, but I'm not well versed in a lot of their programs.
If I could pull rank and just ask a quick question, how do you see the living shorelines surviving through water level rise? How are you all like preparing your sites to be more resilient to that?
Yeah, I think a lot of those resilient the outcome 3 projects that we talked about, kind of the Assateagues, West River, a lot of those projects, West River, Water Street, some of them were bulkheaded before, so I have no doubt they'll be more resilient long term. But the thing that comes up a lot as a question is, how do we stop this flooding? We're not going to stop sea level rise. How do we address these flooding issues? And while installing a living shoreline will help with that, it'll help break up those wave energies when you do get that high tide. It's not going to prevent flooding. So that's one of those common questions that we get, and it's there's really, we just have to look upland to see what quantity of water that we can take care of and soak back into the ground and spread it out, hold it up high in the landscape, and then look to the tidal area to see what wave energies we can break up, and then how easy is it to come back and add stone material if you need to in the future. Like some of those structural practices, you have a layer of armor stone, while some of the multi aggregate type practices, you could just bring in a couple more loads of cobble and gravel and sand and raise it up, put some more plugs. So the armor stone, you're talking stone a couple feet wide, 3 feet, in some cases. So to put another layer of armor stone, you'd have to really expand your footprint of that structure, and you'd be up quite a bit higher. You can't just add 6 inches to, a +4 breakwater. You'd have to really. So it's something interesting to think about when you're thinking about coming back and more of the long-term perspective. So that's kind of the lens we've been looking at it through.
Okay, thanks. Judy?
So it sounds like you're doing great work, but in seeing that map, those dots were very scattered where you've got projects. Obviously, this is really important for our native plants and our native animals. What do you need to reach more people, reach more organizations? How can you be more effective and get more of these living shorelines in?
Yeah. Thanks, Judy. That's a good question. This is, forums like this, I think, are extremely helpful, and organizations like yours and getting that grassroots message out. I think a lot of folks are more well received talking with their neighbor than like a representative, So we've been looking at part of those communities. We've been trying to tie in the outreach and educational components, doing the best with the resources that we have, but we can certainly always improve on the messaging, the outreach. So yeah, we should put our heads together and brainstorm, because I'm sure this group has a lot to bring to the table on this subject and plants in general and customizing those plans. But yeah, we could always use more support. That money, as you mentioned, there was a few dots scattered throughout the state. There was a slug of money given several years ago, which is, you know, it is not the same amount today as it was, but there was a extremely high demand for that project. So I think getting this, you know, running it up the chain, getting folks talking about these projects and their importance is what we can do as citizens.
Okay, thank you. Lauren?
Hi, yeah, thank you. This was great. I learned new things. I'm wondering, I have actually I have two questions. I'll do sourcing first. I'm wondering, how are you doing on sourcing of plant material? Are you able to find or resource local ecotype? You know, that whole issue of the plant material and availability. And I come at that a little bit. I used to live on Long Island, New York. And when Hurricane Sandy hit, they ended up sourcing a lot of the switchgrass from the Great Lakes region. So you're putting freshwater adapted switchgrass into a salt spray environment because there just simply wasn't the availability. So I'm wondering how that's going for you. And
Yeah.
then the second question, so I'm going to get you with two here, sorry, is also on Long Island. It was interesting that during the time that I lived there, there was a marshy area which had a road going out a point, and over time the marsh had degraded and it was causing more flooding on the road because the marsh was this big sponge that would absorb a lot of the tide flow. So while you're saying your projects can't necessarily generally, I'm sure on these small scale things, you're not going to really impact flooding. But if there were no limitations on funds and space that you could work on, is that a realistic thing? Could you actually impact flooding at some level if you could implement this in a scale?
Sure. And that's a fun one. No
No money.
funding restrictions. I like that. Yeah, I think we could certainly impact flooding. To address your second question first, at some level. What that level is, that's tough to say. Because just wherever the project stops, whether it's, you know, 100 linear feet, a mile, 10 miles, that water is just going to find the lowest elevation, and it'll find its way eventually. But there's things, yeah, in the upland, you know, starting with stormwater and just capturing if everybody did their part, you know, all the way up that watershed, I think we could do quite a bit of good. But of course, that funding aspect comes into play. And then as far as sourcing, you know, they're few and far between the nurseries that carry some of those Spartina grasses. We end up planting a lot of folks to, you know, there's Providence Center in Arnold, there's Delmarva Native Plants down in Salisbury, which pretty much strictly focuses on some of these brackish water plants, like those Spartina grasses, switchgrass, things like that. So they're kind of a hub. And there's some other ones as well, but it's limited. So, you know, locally sourcing is really difficult in this world that we're in right now. So that'd be great to see some more startups come online and some more locally sourced genotypes and things.
Thanks.
Mark, it looks like you have 3 questions in the chat, so unmute and ask away.
You mentioned controlling stormwater runoff to protect living shorelines. And I wanted to share with everybody, when you do plants for stormwater runoff to protect living shorelines, plants with a deep root system with a lot of niches hold the water and release it slowly. So native plants that do that are wise to plant.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Mark, you also have that question about migration corridors?
Yes, that's important. The living shorelines, there are plants and animals that need to move to survive each year from a site that's good for the winter versus sites in the summer, so they need a way to migrate. So you want living shorelines that are contiguous, right?
Right. Yep, absolutely. Thinking about these things at a reach scale. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mark. And Mary Ellen.
Thank you. We have a living shoreline that was originally installed in 1996, and it's holding quite well. But we also have tremendous mats of seagrasses that keep floating up and covering all the vegetation along the living shoreline. And so I heard somebody else ask you about algae. How do you feel about removing, or what do you do with these huge thick mats of seagrasses that come up on the shoreline? Do we need to remove them? And if the answer is yes, what do we do with them?
What kind of, can I ask a follow-up question? What kind of seagrasses are they
They're
submerged
the
SAVs or
SAVs, yes.
okay. So maybe they've seeded out and just kind of floated in.
Yeah, I mean, during the high tides, I mean, they're just, really thick and long streams of these things on the shoreline.
Yeah, I mean, if they're impacting your marsh vegetation, which we obviously the main goal, we don't want it to impact the integrity of your project and the tidal marsh vegetation that's established there. But it's also those seagrasses, as they decompose and add some organics into the system, keeping them in that marshy arena there, I don't think is the worst thing, but we certainly don't want them to impact the growth of your Spartina grass. If that's what you have at your
Yeah,
site.
and so if we do selectively remove some, what this stuff is heavy, it's bulky. I mean, you have any suggestions on what to do with it? I mean, throwing it back into the water just is like a cyclical thing.
Yeah, I'd imagine some of it's kind of creating its own rack line, as we talked about before, just kind of sorting itself out a little bit, and you kind of see it on a long linear path there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much like a rack line, and we always tell folks, that's good. You don't want it to get so big that it impact, again, you don't want it to get so large that it impacts the stability of your project and your plants. So maybe you selectively harvest that, and I don't know what you do with the rest, whether you have a site in the upland or maybe just outside your project.
Would it make good compost, or is it too salty for good compost?
You will have to try that and get back to me. Or maybe somebody else knows. I did not know the answer to that question.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. I have two quick questions. One is, do you have priority areas that the agency DNR, is really interested in because of like rare birds, rare plants, habitats or something like that, that you're trying to like target for people rather than having people just say, hey, I'd like you to come over here. And the second question is about other agencies like Fish and Wildlife. Are they doing the same kind of thing? So it's a multi-agency organization, and other organizations, NGOs, are they doing some of this as well?
Yeah, I think that's a great question about targeting. Wildlife and Heritage Service is in our department, and they have all the maps of areas of special state concern and rare, threatened, endangered species, things like that. So it'll certainly get flagged if there is a project proposed. We've got an internal coordination group that looks at all the different resource impacts, SAVs. So it's certainly flagged, and it's discussion throughout the process. Are we specifically targeting those areas? Not so much to do work, maybe in front of to protect. in that regard, kind of like that Deal Beach project. We put the marsh complex there and those breakwaters and dune system back to protect that critical resource. So in that regard, yes. Sometimes with the RTEs and things like that, it's kind of less is more, do less.
Mhm.
Is kind of what I've picked up over the years. And then as part of, there's another initiative, the whole Watershed Act that's just coming online now, as part of the new administration where they're looking at certain subsects of different watersheds. They're selecting a few to specifically target, see if we can get really some targeted ecological restoration goals achieved, some nutrient reductions, and they're sticking to specific watersheds to see if we can get some measurable differences. So that's a new initiative coming online. I don't have much more than that at this point. I think they're looking to hire up for that initiative, but that'll certainly be integrated in decision making moving forward.
Okay. And Fish and Wildlife, did you cover that or?
No, we work with Fish and Wildlife occasionally when, certain species will come up, RTEs and tiger beetles, things like that, where our paths cross a bit, and we'll seek their guidance on what are the best management practices when you're working around these, or is work acceptable at all. So we'll defer to them, but that's at least in my role as it is now. That's kind of how we interact.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Yeah.
Do we have anything else in the chat?
So we had one from HM who seems to have signed off, but it seems like a good question.
That's Hess,
Which
yeah.
is, what kinds of grass can live in a very saline environment that's maybe 30 parts per thousand? And there's a second part of that question too. If the pebbles are small and there's no clay or nutrients, is there any way to plant a grass?
The pebbles are small, so the 30 parts per thousand, I'm going to defer to someone in this group because I don't think we have salinities too high. I know that some of those Spartina grasses survive down on our coasts. Beach grass, a lot of those higher energy salty water environments are typically too high energy for low marsh to establish, so that's why they're just unvegetated beaches. And that kind of ties into the the pebbles along the shoreline, and do you need some organics in there for those plants to establish? And what we're finding with these shingle beaches, Conquest Beach was one shingle beach that I showed, with no gaps, just kind of a hybrid structure with some gravel in the shoreline and sand up top. Haven't had so much low marsh recruitment there, but it's in a little higher energy environment than the other project, the other Shingle Beach project, which is on the West River Church Camp property. And just a few weeks ago, we were out on site and saw we're actually getting some Spartina growth, some hibiscus. We're getting some other plant species involved. So, and Annapolis Maritime Museum was another one where it was just a mixed aggregate stone cobble mixture, and basically you plant them up a little bit different, and acetate. You'll move some large stones and you'll just have a bucket of sand, put it in there, or throw your plant in and throw some sand on top and recover it. And we've had great success like that. Knowing it all washes away, it'll all kind of intermingle, but we've had good success. So we're experimenting.
Thanks very much. I mean, I learned a ton, and I knew very little about these. I was really curious. I mean, I read a little about them, but you gave a really nice, detailed, well-rounded presentation, so I really appreciate it.